Okay, now when we were on Sugarloaf, we were standing directly across from the fort here. Okay. And the old road that you were talking about, Stanley, just a few minutes ago, ran through the Sunny Point property. All this is Sunny Point property, right up to Orton Pond here. The road today, of course, goes on around like this, 133. But you say until the 1930s or so, they used this old river road that ran all the way to Southport here. There was also the Brunswick, or the old British road, as it was called during those days, which went all the way around Orton Pond. Here's the fort here, of course, and the Federals, you know, I told you in mid-February, moved over to Southport to attack Fort Anderson. They came up this road all the way in front of Fort Anderson and recognized, of course, that it was of the same massive character as Fort Fisher, that it was going to, they would incur too many casualties if they tried to take it by frontal assault. So their option was, of course, to go around it by taking the British road and go around Orton Pond and come in behind it. Well, Haygood, who was the brigadier general from Hoke's command and was commanding about 2,000 guys at 2,300 guys at Fort Anderson, failed to properly defend this far section of Orton Pond. It was 6 miles from here to the end of Orton Pond, about a 12-mile detour. So the Federals left 1 brigade of troops in front of the fort and took 2 brigades and brought 1 brigade from Hoke's lines that we looked at earlier, brought them across the river and hooked up here on the far side of Orton Pond. There were only 100 Confederates to try and stop the Federal crossing. And so they were easily pushed away, and the Federals came on around behind Fort Anderson and forced Haygood to retreat. And his retreat from Fort Anderson precipitated the retreat of Hoke from Sugarloaf. Now the map just prior to that one is the best, is of the fort itself, so that we are standing, well, there's the church right there, so that we're standing right about here. And you can see that the lines ran all the way out to the pond for about 800 yards. And the Federals, all the ground in front of the fort, so that all that area that is today Brunswick Town was cleared off for about 300 yards. There wasn't a stump out there. And the Confederates dug rifle pits and all that, and actually had a little battery down here, and the Federals came up and dug in about 600 yards in front of the fort and sent out skirmishers out into the low ground. And so there was this massive firefight between the Confederates in the fort and those Federals out about 300 yards, this massive firefight for 2 days. So there's a lot of metal out there.
And that was just a demonstration?
That was just a demonstration while the other guys went around the pond. And the entire fort's still here. And of course what we're going to see, the main fort was down here.
You think we should go in and look at that map in there?
Sure, yeah, that'll be fine. We're not rushed to be anywhere. Some were sent down to Charleston, several stayed here. Now here's an insulator off of a telegraph. So this is probably an insulator from the telegraph that ran from between here and Wilmington. Shovel, canteens, Confederate mulane shell in the back.
Oh, what kind of shell? I'm sorry.
Mulane.
What does that mean?
Just the maker of the shell, I think, is what it means. There's a big, there's an 11-inch ball frag, Tom. Here's your frag right here.
Now which?
That's after they've cleaned it up on the
That's what it looks like if you get
You
clean
think
it up.
that's the same thing?
Same thing.
11-inch, you said?
About 11-inch ball.
Which is, are we looking at one of those anywhere?
That's a 15-inch ball right beside us. That's a...
Now is that only 15 inches in diameter?
Right.
Then if it were coming towards you, you'd think it
By comparison, this is a 32-pound solid shot right there. And the one behind it is about an 8-inch shot, 8-inch shell. And the one behind that, I guess, is a 6-1.
Well, did they explode on impact or were they timed?
Well, this is a solid shot. This is just
I mean,
solid iron.
the second one there.
The second one,
Well, like the 11-inch, I think.
that was, that's not a percussion fuse. It's a time, it was a time fuse. They had both.
So George, when you picked up that, did it look that good or too clean?
Chris, this
Chris
is all they put through
the tank.
electrolysis.
And you just dug down with a little trowel around it.
But he did
So
he
they
clean
would
it?
time the fuse like that,
They ran
depending on how far they were shooting and what they wanted to go off right before it hit the ground there?
Right.
You know, time fuses didn't always do such a good job.
Well, what was the theory behind the 250,000, or however many pounds of powder they had in that ship, that did they honestly
The
think
Louisiana?
that? Did they honestly think that would level the fort?
Butler did.
Butler did.
I mean, any engineer could have told him that wasn't gonna happen, couldn't he?
Well, as it turned out, it ended up about 800 yards from the fort. But Butler thought that if they could get it right up underneath the fort, the concussion, a simultaneous explosion would create a concussion that would just completely level the sand fort. He was basing his presumption on an accident that had occurred in England the year before, something like that, where there had been a simultaneous explosion of 100 tons of gunpowder, and it leveled like 3 city blocks. So he said, well, maybe we can...
Of course, did the shock wave would go up and over the sand where it's going against a wooden building.
Well, as it turned out, the winds apparently were coming from the south that night, and the report was barely heard in Fort Fisher. There's a little bit of a concussion, and the sentries didn't even bother to wake up Lamb. It stirred Lamb from his sleep in his headquarters, and he merely wrote down in his diary the next day that some blockader had run aground and set herself on fire, and then a boiler exploded. That's all. But yet some people claim that they could hear it as far away as Fayetteville. I doubt that, but certainly the shock was distinctly felt in Wilmington, which was about 15 miles away.
Also, the way they ignited it was not the way that they had initially planned. Initially had planned to have it all go off at once, but as they were getting off the ship, didn't they also start some fires to make sure that it would blow?
Right.
But what that did was ignite it
Sporadically.
Yeah, sporadically. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So it did not explode simultaneously. Right?
One another concept was that if they exploded that, the ammunition that they had stored in the bunkers might go off too.
Never read that theory. He just thought that the fort would be completely leveled, and that the garrison the next morning would be so demoralized that the army literally could just walk into the fort.
Not a bad idea.
It's a shame they didn't just not say anything and be real quiet, let them come ashore. Well, you know that picture I've got of Buchanan says that they had a rubber-coated fuse leading from either Buchanan, I think, to Fisher, whereas they could blow up Buchanan from inside Fisher.
And that's why the Federals for a long time
Is
suspected.
that a possibility?
That was a possibility.
I mean, a
that's why
fuse
the
going that
Federals
far.
suspected for a long time. Remember the big explosion that took place the morning after the surrender, when the main magazine was blown up by 2 drunken sailors or Marines who were wandering around looking for booty. And they walked into the main magazine, which had been overlooked the night before, because sentries had been posted in front of all the magazines that could be found, but they overlooked this one somehow. And so 2 drunken sailors and Marines walked into it, struck a match. The thing went off. Well, as it turned out, a number of prisoners, Confederate prisoners, and weary Union troops had taken refuge on the magazine itself, just thinking it was a big mound. And the thing blew up and buried hundreds of guys. In fact, when the fort started washing away after, 1938 or so, periodically skeletons would be found washing out of the embankments. It buried hundreds of guys. So the initial theory was that the Confederates had purposely detonated it, either not from Buchanan, but from across the river, perhaps at Fort Anderson or down at a little battery called Battery Lamb. As it turned out, there was a congressional investigation. As it turned out, they discovered that these 2 guys had wandered in there and just struck a match. They have no idea who it was, because of course they were
They went around to talk about it.
right.
They were eyewitnesses, but
Yeah, and they're wonderful photographs. T.H. Sullivan took a beautiful photograph of the area, and there's just a giant hole. I don't know how many tons of gunpowder. Porter sent his squadron of about 14 vessels, 14 of the 30 had the river at the time, 14 vessels up to bombard the fort at the same time. There's a great story about close brush with death between 2 Confederate officers. Eugene Martin, who was chief of ordnance down on Oak Island, which is where Fort Cavanagh was, and John J. Hedrick were standing on the parapet right about in here somewhere, very close to the church. They were standing up on top of the parapet, watching the bombardment, because of course the shells at that time, you could stand and one of those big 15-inch balls would be fired, and said, well, here comes one of those balls, we better get out of the way, and they'd duck and it'd explode, that kind of thing. Very slow and cumbersome shots. They were standing up there and said that this 11-inch Dahlgren shell came over their heads. They watched it go over their heads and exploded near the church, very close to the church. And a giant frag, much like the one that we found up there, the giant frag came whizzing right between the 2 of them where they were standing. It came so close to him that it actually cut the sword from Hedrick's side, took it right off of his belt, and whizzed on by. Took the belt with them and everything. He said that they walked away from it. Just of course their pants were wet. But they just walked away.
Who were the two officers?
Hedrick and Martin.
Eugene S. Martin and John J. Hedrick.
And they're both Wilmingtonians, aren't they?
Both Wilmingtonians.
Don't you have a,
And Hedrick was the commander at Fort Holmes on Bald Head Island until that, of course, was evacuated after the fall of Fort Fisher. And what's interesting is the guy who was the brigadier general who was commanding the defenses of the lower Cape, the mouth of the Cape Fear River, that is Fort Fisher, Fort Holmes, Fort Johnson, was a man named Lewis A. Bear, who was from Louisiana. Well, he was conducting the evacuation, but when Hedrick got all of his men removed from Bald Head and got to Southport, when he got there, Hedrick was drunk on his butt and couldn't do anything. And as a matter of fact, by the time they got up to Fort Anderson, Hedrick lodged a complaint because of Hedrick's behavior during the evacuation. And Hedrick was, let's just say, put into another department. He was taken away from the field command. That's why it fell to Haygood. That's why Hope sent Haygood over here. Because Hedrick couldn't, they didn't think Hedrick could do the job.
Now, Chris, would the soldiers have built this themselves?
Soldiers and slaves.
And slaves.
This is strictly an infantry bulkhead here at the...
Well, the lower sand curtain here, except for light artillery, that is 10-pound Parrots and 12-pound Napoleons that were on the line intermittently all the way out to Orton Pond.
Would they be on top or behind this
They
parapet?
would have been behind the parapet in certain places. Now, the main fort, from this area on down the main fort, there were the larger seacoast guns, and there were only 9 of them in this fort, as opposed to 44 at Fort Anderson. Of course, they didn't need them in the river as much, or Fort Fisher. Yeah, and they were all part of the main fort, which we'll walk down.
What size shell would they fire?
Most of them were 10-inch Columbiads, so 10-inch.
Chris?
And 32-pounders.
I think actually walking along the parapet is the way to get.
Can we do that? Yeah, sure. They won't let you do that at Fort Fisher anymore because they say that there was so much traffic on the parapets that they were helping to erode them.
Don't you have a story in your thesis about Cushing coming up to the fort one night or one day and listening to speeches or something?
Yeah.
They felt
Here's a gun chamber here, Stanley.
Yeah.
You can see where the infantry curtain took off from here. This is pretty much the end of the main part of the fort. Colonial dwelling like that.
You might have torn that down so they could have good enfilade fire.
Yeah. I wonder how much of the town was left at that point. Because they say there were people still living in the town into the 1840s. So there were obviously some dwellings still standing.
Must have been something.
But the Confederates cleared off all this land for about 300 yards, all the way down into what is Sunny Point property today. They had a clear range of fire.
that's 61.
All the way through.
All the way through.
Here you go. Stanley, go.
Gun emplacement, yeah.
I'd like to see it. I've seen that one report, but Rossfield doesn't have anything to do with it. I can't think who did it.
I know.
You know who I'm talking about. That was done a long time ago.
The name of the fort, first fort, July 62 when it was
Mosquito City, that's right. We're lucky it was freezing.
Down towards the river.
Well, did the yellow Beaver play get to Fisher at all, or any of the other forts?
Not the way that it hit Wilmington. And of course, the soldiers were kept away from town. And after that epidemic, Fort Anderson also served as a quarantine station.
Chris, now, when they were building in the 1800s Fort Johnson, is that Southport?
That's Southport. And is that still being used down there, or have they?
I don't know why I thought it was near Fort Anderson.
This alternating magazine. There's a great story about these two black soldiers who were stationed at Fort Anderson after the war, about 1866, 1867, who wandered into a magazine, much as those sailors had down at Fort Fisher, and struck a match, and they were killed too, blown out of the magazine. That happened after the war. Also read this interesting story in the Wilmington paper about these two black guys who had been down to Fort Anderson or Fort Fisher and collected scrap metal, which they were taking up to the ironworks in Wilmington and selling. And they found this big ball, which was still a live ball, and they took it up there, and the guy said, "Well, we're not going to buy it till you defuse it." Yeah. So the black guys went out in the back down by the river and just started hammering on it,
Oh my Lord.
and the thing blew up. Hard way to learn your lesson. Yep.
Did they were the black troops here just by accident, or was that a definite thing to kind of show the...
Well, that Butler's expedition, the troops were pulled from his command, the Army of the James, and they were black troops.
So it wasn't anything just to try to rub Wilmington's nose in it?
No, I've never found any evidence of that.
Because the people resented so much that they patrolled in the streets and all that kind of stuff.
The black regiments that were sent down, the black brigades that were sent down here were no slouches. They were crack soldiers. They were some of the earlier regiments formed during the war, and they were top-notch fighters. As a matter of fact, when Schofield's corps got over here in early February, most of the guys from Schofield's corps were Westerners, and they'd never seen many blacks, much less black soldiers. So they actually went out onto the battlefield to watch the black soldiers perform, just to see what they were like. So they figured, they'd heard all the same stories too.
What is this area here that would see
This
that?
is just the interior of the fort.
Okay, they,
now-
This is a gun chamber right here.
they built parapets over on that side
Right.
too.
Get to it here.
But where would they sleep and eat and stuff?
They had barracks that are in the parking lot today. So that we're right in here now. So
I got you.
right there. So this is the main fort right here. Glad they cleared it off.
The wind's quieted down nicely.
The river was so high the other day.
These are all gun emplacements, they're not.
Stanley says Tom is standing on top of the people. What a mob.
Yeah, I heard about that.
We're not going to allow him to do that.
Well, we're going to shoot him
We're going to
first.
feed him to the alligator.
You forget that, that's my bread and butter that comes to me first thought.
Remember those Mayfair days down there? And I was
done. Not at all. Two stories.
Now let's see Sugarloaf. Can we see it?
I think we'll have to go down to the river to see. Two stories I want to tell you though about Fort Anderson.
That must have been
The first one is a reconnaissance by Cushing. You all know the daredevil Cushing. Well, he was in the Cape Fear until about the time that Wilmington was taken. But his last tricky assignment was to check out the obstructions in the river that were guarding Fort Anderson. The Federals, of course, knew that they were out there, but they had no idea how strong the fort was, or what the only from what they could see from the riverside, or from out on the river. But they weren't sure about the obstructions. So Cushing got a hand-picked crew one night, put them in a couple of boats, and came up all the way to Fort Fisher, or Fort Anderson. Got a good look at the obstructions in the river. Found out that the gunboats could not pass through the obstructions. They were too heavy.
Kind of obstructions were?
All kinds of pilings and chains and all kinds of just junk thrown in the river. And up close to Eagles Island, they actually sunk ships. But there was just a narrow passage through these obstructions in the river. So Cushing realized, of course, that they had to bombard and take the fort before they could make the passage through the obstructions. But Cushing being Cushing, when he was going back down to the fleet, he decided to stop at Fort Anderson and see what was happening in the fort. So he landed just north of the fort with his crew by himself, snuck his way into the fort, or close to the fort, close enough to where he heard this speech being given, I think, by Hedrick. The soldiers one night.
Was sober at the time?
No, that was Hebert. That was Hebert.
Okay.
Hebert was gone by this point. But Cushing was on the outside of the walls, apparently, listening to this speech that Hedrick was giving to his soldiers, like, for love of country, and all you patriot soldiers, we can handle these Yankee invaders, It said that this brass band was playing patriotic strains, and the guys were whooping it up. And then finally the guard discovered the boats in the river. Cushing hightailed it back to his boats, got in his boats, and took off. And the Confederates fired on them from the fort. They could see them, the silhouettes of the boats at night, and they were firing on them. And Cushing and him, they were firing back. These small arms were firing back at him. But he got away once again. Cushing's luck held out, and he escaped again.
Talking about the bands, everything I've read about in the Civil War, that for both sides, the bands were so important for morale, and they had a lot of the same music. I mean, it was like the hit parade, orally, and whatever was in. But it said the North Carolina troops, we had this special program, Sunday for the Historical Society, and they said the North Carolina troops official music book. Their musicians were Moravians, most of them. So they had all these German polkas and mazurkas and all this stuff. These North Carolinians never heard any of this. Ooh, papa, ooh, papa. That became the part of all their music.
Well, I ran across a wonderful story in one of the Yankee newspapers, and apparently during the bombardment of Fort Anderson, the band of the 104th Ohio out in front of the fort started playing music, to boost the morale of the Yankee troops out there, who were being shelled furiously from the fort. So they started playing their music. Well, apparently the guys in Fort Anderson, above the din of the battle, heard the music playing. So they got their band and posted them as close to the top of the parapet as they could get them, and they played Southern music. So while the battle's raging back and forth, you got these two bands playing to each other.
The Battle of the Bands.
The Battle of the Bands, right. The other story was, I heard as a young boy that the reason that Fort Anderson was evacuated by the Confederates was because of Cushing's monitor. Well, Cushing came up with this grand scheme to construct a bogus monitor, a sham monitor, and to send it up underneath the guns of the fort, hoping that it would scare the Confederates to detonate their torpedoes that the Yankees knew were in the river. They had these floating torpedoes out there. So he did. Porter agreed, and Cushing constructed down at Southport this bogus monitor, made it of barrel staves and lumber and canvas, and said that it was so perfect that at some distance, 100, 200 yards, you couldn't tell the difference between that one and the Montauk. So one night he had the monitor, the sham monitor, towed up and released on a flood tide, and the thing, by dam, sailed up the river and right through the obstruction somehow, and right past Fort Anderson and ended up grounding on the east side of the river behind Sugarloaf. Now Cushing, when he left here, just before the fall of Wilmington, Cushing went to Washington and went to see the president. He got Secretary of the Navy Wells to take him to see the president and boasted to the president that this is the reason that Fort Anderson had been evacuated, because of his sham monitor, which is the biggest bunch of bull. I ran across a letter that was written by a Confederate in early February of '65. At the time that Cushing was constructing the monitor down at down at Southport. It was great. The guy said the Yankees are constructing these sham monitors, a monitor or sham monitors down at Southport, and we feel sure that our cute little Yankee friends are going to send them by the fort one night in hopes that we'll explode our torpedoes underneath them. But we're going to thwart our cute little Yankee friends, and because we know they exist. So the Confederates knew all along what was happening.
Well, didn't you say there was a telegraph from Smithfield over to Fisher?
Well, now keep in mind though that Southport had fallen by that point.
Okay, but there's okay.
Right, and so the Confederates knew all along that Cushing was constructing his sham monitor.
But some of those pilots from Southport, I bet they got the word out somehow.
Well, even when I was a kid, that was the story. That, in other words, Cushing's myth had been perpetuated, and in fact, I even found it in one of the New York papers, the New York Herald or something, where the guy was writing, the reporter was writing that precipitated the Confederate evacuation of Fort Anderson. But that wasn't true at all. What precipitated the evacuation, of course, was the 3 brigades on the far end of Orton Pond who were coming in around behind them and would have cut them off from their retreat. But there are a lot of neat little human interest stories associated.
George, can you see Sugarloaf?
That's what I was
Let's walk down there and see if we can.
trying to see. There's an area straight across there.
Stanley, what kind of plant is that?
It's a wild tobacco plant. It's a weed.
It looks a little bit like that landseer that's
It's a weed that grows in primarily sandy soils.
Not on the wartime, the Civil Wartime maps.
was right over there, Sugarloaf.
Yeah, that big sand dune on the other side of the island.
And the name of this island right here?
Spoil Island.
It hasn't been around long enough to get a good name.
Respectful, man.
Where's the channel?
Well, I don't know where it is now.
Would it be where those markers are?
Oh, I know what that is. That's
Tangle.
No. What's the name? It's in Carolina Beach, and I lived there for 3 months. I can't remember the name of it. Harbor.
Oh,
Or
is it?
something. Can't remember the name of it. That, behind the theater, behind Federal Point Shopping Center.
Yeah,
Can't remember the name of that place.
I don't
Sure.
think George Washington threw it to Silver
Oh, there's that red buoy that we could see.
Oh, yeah, I was wondering. Yeah.
I bet it's close to 2 miles wide. What do y'all think? 2 miles from here to the other side?
No sunset.
Well, I grew up on the old.
Yeah, not quite.
Mile and a half to 2 miles. Man.
Yeah.
Mile and a half?
That's over a mile.
I'm looking at those binoculars. Sure.
You what? Tom? I'll bet you the channel on this side.
maybe that'll get it focused.
This side? Well,
I believe if y'all will look at red buoy is the side channel going into Sunny Point. The main channel is on the outside. Yeah, this is just a detour coming into the dock, the boats at Sunny Point.
see on the map here, show that this is wartime. The channel just goes right adjacent to Fort Anderson.
Yeah. I'm sure that that's the case. Let me go walk down here and see if it's...
gentlemen.
Yeah, that's right. He was addressing the Nobel Prize laureates.
Probably about
Yeah,
the
that's a
same
good one.
thing as the men that gathered right here.
The greatest gathering of genius since Thomas Jefferson died here alone.
But you know, it is amazing reading the Civil War letters. The average officer could write a better letter than the average college graduate today by far.
Think of how tough it's going to be for historians 100 years from now.
There are not gonna be any
We are no
letters.
longer a society of letter writers.
Yeah. It's all on computer disc now, and one good demagnetization is
Well, not only that, but
That
you know,
and you're
phone
constantly revising it when you're doing
Right.
it on a computer.
Yeah,
All
the
those
phone calls are
wonderful.
wiped out.
the phone calls have wiped
Oh, well,
out.
they say for creative
Wolfe.
writing, like,
Yeah.
you know, studying Hemingway or Thomas Wolfe, that where you could look at the drafts and see the progression, that's all completely
gone.
gone.
Unless they have enough sense to print out their first, second, third stop.
Come to letter writing, though, probably my personal favorite was Bedford Forrest, who was virtually illiterate but managed to say what he wanted to say.
In no uncertain terms.
Right. Remember the
that a
officer.
wonderful
Remember the officer who kept pestering him, trying to get a home leave or home furlough.
Yeah, yeah.
He
What did he write
He
back?
finally wrote back,
God
"Don damn it, twice I told you no." No, I told you twice no.
Get the message across.
It's just amazing to me that the walls of St. Philip's Church have remained.
endured
Oh,
all
look
this
at that. I
all
hadn't.
these years. Look at that. I mean, they
reinforced
haven't
them,
lost a
haven't
single.
they?
Well, why wouldn't they have been torn down at the time? They have any respect at all for that?
Well, of course, they commemorated the structure by calling this St. Philip for a while. And I guess they just didn't want to desecrate the church.
I mean, the walls hadn't been torn down and put back together.
I think that is just such a kind of moving place to go there.
You know
But I can't
what
imagine it makes sense doing it there.
Well, the church.
Okay, of course, this side and the other side would have been the side, well, really the other side would have been exposed to the largest amount of fire.
Chris, did you get a letter from a guy in California about military equipment? He kept calling me and asking me about this gun and that gun. And he wanted to know what type of weapons of destruction were used at Fort Fisher.
How about that, Stanley?
Now that looks like something. That's got to be something hit that, a shell or a bullet. Couldn't have been a very big shell. Looks like it. What are these indentations for? Was that to put? I wonder what an architect would say those were for.
Beverly, what do you think?
These, I think they've done this for some reason to protect it. I don't know how, moisture or.
Just to keep it aerated, you mean?
Yeah,
I mean, that was done after.
yeah, I think it might have been done not too long ago. I'm pretty sure they've done a lot of reinforcement of this.
But, you know, there are places where the brick is.
Well, now, why would these be sort of in a pattern? Is this?
I was saying, I think it's to preserve the structure, maybe for air or, I don't know.
You mean you think somebody deliberately removed those bricks?
I don't know, it could have been a pattern that was used in colonial architecture.
You know, that's a pretty good sized church.
Well, yeah, what I'm talking about, could be too old.
See here where the brick is different.
Look at this, W. Stone, 1923.
Yeah.
Or 73, I guess.
Or something like that.
It also looks like the top has been redone all the way around with a different brick and a different mortar.
Well, where was the entrance now? Is this
On the
right?
left.
There were two on the two sides.
This was not
Right here.
this was not a door.
Yeah, this would have been a door, and then these two.
I believe this would be the main entrance.
Yeah, that would have been the altar up where the front there.
The two side entrances.
When was it
Looks
built?
like lots of churches in Virginia, don't you think?
Earlier than that, cause what was the date, Diane?
1735, wasn't it?
completed
36?
36 comes to
Yeah, I think
mind,
it was
but I
completed
don't
by
know why.
39, wasn't it?
And it was just what, pretty much abandoned, I mean, until the Sprunts gave it? It was just sitting out here in the
Well,
woods?
by the Revolution, the town was pretty much shot. Although I've read in newspaper accounts, at least, that people were living here until the 1840s.
But say from the 1880s to the 1950, nothing,
Yeah.
just,
Well, I mean, Smith
Inside
was
it
buried
said
here.
1825.
Smith was buried here in the 1820s.
Inside the museum, it
Said 1825?
1825. By 1825, no one was living here.
I knew it was in the early 19th century.
Yeah.
And there were people still living in the town.
Well, Smith lived, was he living at Orton at the time he died? I've forgotten, because he owned Belvedere, didn't he?
Wasn't he
I thought he
penniless
was
when
in
he
Southport.
Yeah.
has some high class down.
Good God.
Oh, Darren's, yeah. Somebody probably put that, probably some old Wilmingtonian put that up.
But they
just to show.
continue to come out here and have church services. I know in the 1880s.
That's neat.
Well, they still have church services here.
Do they have them once a year?
Once a year, Episcopalians all gather and bring a picnic lunch down, and they bottle of wine and enjoy the stuff.
Don't they have a sunrise service here?
It might be.
Wow.
And just beyond here is where it goes into Sunny Point. Right there.
Where it goes what?
The port cuts into the Sunny Point property.
And then it passes through this front property.
It passes through.
Now this looks like bullet holes here. But why would bullets be coming from this direction?
Yeah. Sure does, doesn't it?
That looks more like what a bullet would do.
Could have done charge.
Sure does. Look at that over there.
Somebody emptied a shotgun on that.
You ever been to Pulaski, Chris?
Yeah.
Somebody just opened up probably number 2 buck on that.
I wonder if they use the old prayer book when they come down. I'd be
They
afraid
should.
to use the new one. I'd think the walls would fall in on me.
The ghost would come get you.
Yeah, right.
Now, is this where you and George found the shell? Is this where you and George found the shell?
No, that's back out on 133. Show you that.
You know, I just love to come to a place like this and think, what must those people have thought? This was a wilderness. Looks like a wilderness now. If they hadn't given the Indians so much trouble, they probably might have made it.
They were only here for how long? Only a couple of years.
7.
Oh, that long?
You know what that refers to?
Barnard's Creek is right over here.
What water tower is that?
You needed their goodwill,
I'm trying to think.
and it would have been really
I don't remember seeing one out there, but it's got to be about Monkey Junction. What industry's out there?
That's north of Monkey Junction.
North of Monkey Junction?
Yeah. Well, no, I'm sorry. Never mind.
Just this way.
I noticed it on that map.
You know, some of those people were the ones that went then in 1670 to Charleston, South Carolina, Charlestown, Maine.
These same
Some of these people, yeah.
They tried twice, in 1653 and then in 67.
55 and it's just about over.
I've always wanted to know what was on that sign.
Me too. I wonder where they put it.
They said they put it right at the mouth of the river, coming in, but I guess they're across from Baldwin.
What sign is that?
That there was a sign that told them not to come here. I mean, that this was a terrible place. We don't know exactly what the sign said. But,
Who put it there?
Hilton's group didn't there. Those adventurers about Cape Fear that came here from New England in 16,
Well, twice, first in 63 and then in 67, so it would have been the 67 group left, about 68 or 69, and
Did they put
Charlestown Landing.
Did they put it in neon or did they put it in flashing?
Yeah, it was a neon sign, flashing too.
Yeah.
Go away.
Yeah.
said EC.
Yeah. Joe's Cafe.
How far is the mouth of Town Creek from here, Chris?
Half a mile.
And you've walked down there before from here? Is it good
Now
high
tell me
land?
something like this that I'm seeing now. High tide, is that underwater or not?
What, that island?
Yeah.
No.
About half.
Those are
Right
spoil
now it's
islands.
about as high as the river ever gets, isn't it?
Yeah. Those are spoil islands.
What's a spoil island mean?
When they dig and dredge the river out, they throw the spoil up and make these islands. It's what's along the inland waterway on either side.
Is there a lot of bird life over there?
Yes, there is. Matter of fact, it's great for birds. They've had a real resurgence in a lot of endangered populations around here as a result.
Deer, possum,
Connie
coon.
A deer would go be over there?
That's one island.
Deer can
What do they do, swim back and forth?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, they've actually had bears. Bears swim from the Brunswick side to downtown Wilmington.
Yeah. This island that you're looking at right here is 158 acres. I was looking at it the other day, and it has grown tall trees on it.
You know, I've got a spoil island right across from there.
Let's take a look at Cowan's Plantation. Well, what's left of it?
Is that right?
I guess if you build your condo here, I'm going
We'll save you a penthouse.
How about timeshare, Stanley?
Let's all buy one.
You can have 3 days in January and July.
Development community.
This is a gorgeous spot, isn't it?